Coming up on the Men at the Movies podcast, I seek the glimpses of the gospel found in the Disney movie Hercules. In his attempt to find a place of belonging, Hercules chases his worth through accomplishments, doing things, being famous. But it's only through the power of self-sacrificial love that he defeats evil and becomes the hero he's meant to be. Wait, is my hair out? Join us as we discover God's truth in this movie.
The movies and stories we love are gateways to see ourselves and God in new ways.
Every great story borrows its power from a larger story, the story that's written on our hearts and woven into the fabric of our very being. Hello and welcome to the Men at the Movies podcast. My name's Paul McDonald, and joining me from down, not quite in, but very close to Disney World is Corey. How you doing this morning, Corey?
Hey, what's up, Paul? I'm doing all right. How are you doing?
Very good. Very good. We get to dive into one of the non-princess movies that Disney provides.
Yeah, it's about time. And I think there's some more non-princess movies we can get into, but this one's definitely a good one.
Yeah, it's even one of my favorites, I think, stories is Aladdin, which I know it does have a princess, but the story's not really about her. It's more about Aladdin. At least the original version was anyway.
It's not called Jasmine.
So, have you been to Disney World recently?
So I had a meeting with youth ministers in Orlando. So for everyone listening, I live in Jacksonville, Florida, and you probably don't, maybe don't really know where that is. That's about 2 hours and 10 minutes maybe from Disney World. I had a meeting in Orlando with a bunch of youth ministers. We're trying to figure out what to do for like mission trips and service stuff for the upcoming summer. And so I had a meeting at a church about 25 minutes outside of Disney World last Thursday. And so I thought, okay, so I'm going to wake up at 5 a.m. I'm going to leave the house and I'm going to go to Hollywood Studios and I'm going to just be there for like 90 minutes, 100 minutes by myself, walk around. I'll ride a ride. I'll get breakfast. It'll be great. I won't have to push a stroller. Won't have to do any of that stuff. It was not what I thought it was going to be. I don't know if you've ever gone somewhere and it's just not what you thought it was going to be. But no, me and my family, we went to Animal Kingdom and Hollywood Studios 2 weeks ago. Had a good time. Had a really good time. So we go a lot, but we don't. I don't feel like we go crazy amount, but we go enough to where it doesn't get old, and we look forward to the next one for sure.
Awesome. So we're talking about Hercules today, which it came out. I was surprised how I'm always surprised when I start looking at the dates of some of these movies. So this came out in 97. You are my Disney guy. So what is it? What is the big thing about this movie that you're excited to talk about today? Well,
Hercules is great. For a couple of different reasons. I think it's a little different than all the other movies. In a weird way, I don't know. I don't want to say it's weirdly religious because, as we know, nobody looks at Hercules and thinks, "Oh, this is a movie about religion." Yeah. But in a ways, it's based off of millions and millions of people's religion. It's not a practice of religion really anymore, but so it is in a weird way kind of a religious movie. It's got fantastic music, probably pretty underrated Disney music. Yeah. So it's a lot of fun. And like we've already talked about privately before the show, there's just a lot of nuances. There's a lot of kind of like Beauty and the Beast, where you kind of think, oh, I feel like I've heard this little part of the story before. Where have I heard that? Oh, that's just straight out of the Book of Revelation. Or that's this little part of God's story or whatnot. And so there's a lot of good reasons. I think we can talk about this, and this might be an easy conversation for us to have. There's a lot of rumor, and I'm not even quite sure if it's rumor anymore. I think it might be a plan. I think Hercules is the next big live action Disney movie that's going to be coming out, and so that should be a lot of fun.
Not sure how I feel about that one.
Well, I have heard, and I don't know if this is confirmed or not, but I've heard Ariana Grande will be Meg. And everyone's thinking, man, I don't know if you could get someone who might be more perfect to play Meg, like skinny little girl, big voice, kind of sassy. I don't know. But anywho, so it's a good movie. There's lots of reasons to talk about it.
So it's interesting because Joseph Campbell, he talked about the hero's journey back in, I think, the 70s, probably before that. It's been a long time. He wrote about what he called the monomyth. We tend to call it the hero's journey, where all these great stories, these great myths, these legends from village tales all the way up to, and he, includes Christianity, Buddhism, the Greek gods here, all under the same big umbrella, so that they all go through the same process. The hero gets invited to an adventure. He initially refuses, then he takes it. He has to go through this road of trials, friends, enemies. Then he has this death and resurrection and homecoming, where he comes back as a new person to bring what he's learned, the treasure of what he's learned. And while I don't subscribe that all of the stories are myth, the idea that, we here at the podcast, we sort of say, the reason that these stories have power to move us is because they're taking the power from the power of the gospel, the power of the Bible.
Right.
Because you mentioned this briefly, this idea that there are little glimpses of the truth. And we say, if it's true, it comes from God because God is truth. This idea that even in the beginning of the movie, very similar to what you mentioned with Beauty and the Beast, you've got the son of the king. Something happens. Evil enters the story, banishes him from Eden. In this, it was, Apollo or Olympus, banishes him from Eden, but he still maintains that eternal spark within him.
Mm-hmm.
And then, even to the point where they say, oh, in the prophecy, Hades, you've got to get rid of Hercules because he's going to mess up your plans. And that's, Genesis 3. He's going to stomp on the serpent's head, right? You're going to bruise his heel, but he's going to crush your head.
Right. And so if you remember, again, I say this every time we record, stop the episode if you haven't seen Hercules in a while and go watch it, because this won't make sense to you if you last time you saw it was in 1997. But there's those, what are they called, those three like old lady creatures that they share one eye. What are they called again?
It wasn't was it the oracles?
I don't.
It wasn't the muses, because the muses tend to be beautiful, but
well, and the muses were the singers, right?
Oh, again, that's right. Yeah.
Zero sense if you have not seen the movie in 2 decades. But those three lady kind of creatures, they represent prophecies. They quite literally give a prophecy that if Hercules fights, your plan will fail. And so his whole big plan, his whole big idea is that he's got to, Hades, his whole plan is he's got to figure out a way to get rid of the god's son, right? And so, just like Beauty and the Beast, how it starts with that, little prologue, and if you haven't seen the Beauty and the Beast episode, go check it out. But it starts with that prologue. It's so beautiful, and it's just such a picture of of Genesis, basically. In the same way, Hercules starts with this idea that there's Zeus, who is the god, and Hades, who's kind of the antithesis of him, right? It's good and evil, and Zeus has a son, and we find out that Zeus's son, once he kind of falls out of heaven, and again, we don't want to get too crazy with our theology.
This isn't a full application of theological principles.
Right. Jesus did not fall out of heaven. That's not what I'm saying. But, Hercules kind of gets out of heaven, we'll say it that way. And we find out when he's in earth, he is literally part human and part God, just like Jesus. Well, he's not part, he's fully human and fully God. And Hercules, just like Jesus, holds the power in this story, holds the power to kind of be the crushing blow to evil. Should Hercules, fight, your plan will fail. I kind of think, I think a lot of people just assume, maybe people outside of Christian circles assume, well, if Jesus is God, he was going to do it no matter what, right? I mean, in the garden, it's very, very, very clear, very, very clear in the garden that Jesus had to make a choice, right? In the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus had to make a choice. Should Jesus fight, this plan will fail, right? He had a choice. And thankfully for all of us, for all of humanity, he chose to fight back evil with his own obvious sacrificial love. And we'll get into this a little bit later, I know, but sacrificial love is obviously a big theme towards the end of the story as well in the movie Hercules. So there's just a lot of really cool kind of nuances, and like you said, we'll call them nods to truth, capital T, truth, right? Nods to truth found in this movie.
If you haven't seen the movie in a little bit, you've got Hercules. He gets trained up by Phil, the what's he? It's not a fawn.
Half goat, half person.
Half goat, half person. It sounds like a fawn,
Every
but I think that's a different.
Movie has a half goat, half person. I mean,
a satyr. That's it.
Sure.
I think that's it. We got to get our mythologies correct. And he gets trained. He goes and fights. Hades wants to take him out, and as always, there's a girl involved, Meg. And it's interesting because as you were talking about that idea of, if he chooses, that's what the fate said, if he chooses to fight. And so Hades' plan at the end, after he couldn't find a weakness, couldn't figure out how to take him out, he made him normal. He says, doesn't it feel great to feel like everyone else? Because he had taken his strength away. But he didn't take away, he didn't say don't fight. He said, I'll take away your strength. Mm-hmm. Because the interesting thing was Hercules still went to fight, even though he didn't have any of the supernatural strength anymore. And he gets tossed around, and then Meg gets hurt. He gets his strength back and all. And then, the hero comes in to save the day. The interesting thing about that is that idea, and we're going to talk about this idea of proving our worth and how that sort of is a running theme, not just proving our worth, but chasing belonging. I think those things go hand in hand. But this idea that whatever we do is not enough. But what Hercules did, he knew he wasn't strong enough to beat the Cyclops in that battle, but he showed up anyway. He chose to fight.
Right. Shout out to the lead minister at the San Jose Church of Christ, where I'm the youth minister, Joel Singleton, if he listens, and he should. One of Joel's favorite lines is he likes to say that he just shows up. He's not some super talented, super gifted, just amazing hero of faith. Joel just says he's got the Holy Spirit. He just shows up, and God does stuff. And I really appreciate that. And I kind of think in a lot of ways, it's like you're saying, that's kind of what Hercules does. He doesn't, no longer does he have the superhero strength. He just shows up and continues to fight. And he's obviously fighting for good and fighting for the people he loves. But I really would like to talk a little bit more about kind of the running themes of this movie. And you kind of mentioned both of them. I kind of think in a lot of ways, I kind of feel like when you have a Disney movie, and it's like one of those Disney movies where there's a lot of nods to truth, mm-hmm. right? I always feel like, hey, there's a sermon in there, and you better watch out because I'm coming for it. Youth minister, I'm coming for the sermon that's in the movie. In a lot of ways, kind of like in Moana or in Beauty and the Beast, all of these nods to truth, I do feel like there are sermons in there. And I kind of feel like when you're searching for, like, what is that big spiritual truth, the big spiritual nugget, you're looking for what is that overarching theme that we can see, and it's very obvious. We see it from Scripture. And then a lot of times, this is how I kind of feel. A lot of times I think that there are, maybe sometimes there's like that first obvious initial theme, right? Kind of like, Lion King, he lives in you, right? Oh, so obvious. Every single preacher ever has done that, right? But I kind of feel like sometimes the more even profound ones are the ones where you have to kind of look I hate to quote Lion King, but look harder, right? You just look a little bit harder. I feel like those are the ones that I really, really like. And so I kind of feel like with the movie Hercules, the easy and obvious one theme that's just kind of right in your face is obviously the theme of belonging or trying to find your group, or God has made us with such this innate sense of like, I have got to belong somewhere, right? And we know that this is a big thing because not only does Hercules sing about this once, he sings about it twice in the reprise of Go the Distance. Probably the most famous song in the whole movie, maybe one of the most famous, I'm not a musical person, so I don't know what the technical term is. I think melody or just like the musical score in the background. Bum, 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 bum. I'm sure everyone's appreciating that. But like that really, really famous, melody from that song, he says, I'll do basically whatever I can to find where I belong. And I think that is really important. And I would like to talk about that. I think we should talk about that. But again, like you said, I think there's this other underlying thing that if you look a little bit harder, and it's not just with Hercules, Phil and Meg and Hercules, they're also all trying to figure out how can they prove themselves worthy. It's one thing if one character's going through it, but it seems like if every character's going through it, because I don't really know if Meg was trying to find out where she belongs, right? Phil wasn't. Phil was just on Phil is the half goat, half man. He's just on some island chasing the little, I don't know what those are called.
Tree nymphs.
We should have done some vocab before we started this show, okay? Because half of what we're saying is they're doing this, and then I don't know what it's called, but then they do that. I'm sorry about that. But I'm not quite sure he was looking for a community to fit in. Hercules definitely was, but all three of those characters are looking, I believe, to prove their worth. And I just kind of feel like that might be the meat of our show today,
because those things they overlap, because we want to belong so desperately that we feel like we have to prove ourselves. And I pulled the lyrics up from the Go the Distance because I think it does, as C.S. Lewis says, if we find our desires not met in the world around us, it's only probably true because we're made for somewhere other than this.
Made for another world. Yeah.
He says, I've often dreamed of a far off place where a hero's welcome would be waiting for me, where the crowds would cheer when they see my face and a voice keeps saying, this is where I'm meant to be. It's like, that's our longing for belonging, but I think also a longing for heaven, to receive the reception that's waiting for us on the other side, from a father who says, well done, and an embrace. But the idea of how to get there that's where I think we're going to spend a lot of our time talking. How do we get there? And this movie shows a lot of ways that don't work.
Yeah. When we talk about the idea of belonging, I always see things from a youth ministry point of view because I'm a youth minister, right? A youth ministry professor that I know, he loves to say this. He says teenagers, and by the way, Paul, one of my big ministry theses that I've been developing over the past couple of years, the older I get, the more I see this. I really do believe there's really not that many differences between teenagers and adults. I think adults, they try to dress it up, but everybody's the same.
We just hide it better. We have more elaborate fig leaves.
But adults are really good at hiding it. Teenagers are just a whole lot more blunt, and they don't care probably what you think quite as much. But This youth ministry professor that I know out in Nashville, Tennessee, at Lipscomb University, he says every teenager is born and they have antennas, like two little antennas, just like an ant. And all they do, their entire existence, at school, at practice, at home, at church, they're walking around, and those two little antennas are trying to feel out everybody, and they're just wondering one simple question. Maybe two simple questions. Number one, do you like me? And number two, do I fit? Or do I belong, right? Do you like me and do I belong? I think adults are like that too. Again, maybe we do a better job at hiding that. But I mean, is there a bigger need in our lives than to find out where I belong? That's literally the lyrics from Go the Distance, to find out where I truly belong or whatnot. I'm thinking of band right now. I'm thinking of band. I am not a band person. I never was a band person. I don't play an instrument. I don't believe that in a high school band or a middle school band that's full of 100 kids, I don't believe everybody in there is just insanely passionate about the alto flute. I know that there are some people who are really passionate about their instrument, but band, more than sports, more than clubs, more than anything, band is so important in high school because it gives kids a place to fit. It just does. That's what band is. Band is belonging, right? I mean, they literally will say, well, he's a band kid, right? Like there's a term that goes with it, right? And who cares if you can play the saxophone or if you're going to do this later? Most of the people are not going to do that in college, right? Most people don't carry their tenor flute to adulthood.
I always wanted to be the guy on the drums. Doom, 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 doom.
How many adults do you know that are still playing the flute? Right? Not many, right?
Yeah.
But what band does is it gives kids a place to fit and an opportunity to belong, and that's what Hercules is looking for. And what he finds, and let's transition to probably the deeper theme that I'd love to talk about. What he finds is, in order to belong, he is trying desperately to prove his worth and to prove that he does belong, right? That's why you kind of saying that proving your worth and belonging kind of they're not the same thing, but they do walk hand in hand. Hercules is trying desperately to prove that he is worthy, right?
Yeah.
And so how's he do it, right? He goes, if you remember the movie, he goes to the temple of Zeus, and the lightning bolt strikes the statue of Zeus, and Zeus kind of comes alive, and Hercules finds out, oh, I'm actually Zeus's son. This is crazy. How can it be? And so he wants to become like Zeus again. He wants his full godhood to be restored. And in a lot of ways, the whole point of the movie is that a child is trying to become like God. There's a nod of truth, right? The Bible says that we ought to strive to become like God as well. And so Zeus says, well, you need to prove yourself a true hero, right? And so that's and of course our God is not asking us to prove maybe anything other than our own faith or loyalty to him, right? I don't believe God has a bunch of hoops that we have to jump through in order to relate to him. But Zeus asks Hercules to prove that he is a true hero. And that's what's kind of the rest of the movie is about. Hercules going about trying to prove this thing. And what's really, really interesting, and we've talked about this already, is that I think Hercules has a misconception of what his God is really asking him to do, doesn't he? He's got this misconception because he goes with Phil, and he gets all strong and jacked, and he's rescuing people from dragons, and he's saving cities from floods, and he's doing all this incredibly heroic stuff. And then he goes back. This is when he goes back to the statue, Zeus, and the lightning bolt strikes, and he pops up, and he's like, all right, Father, I've done it. I've proved myself a true hero. And much to his dismay, Zeus says, "You're not quite there yet. This really wasn't what I was after." And he's like, and Hercules says, "But Dad, you remember what he says? I'm famous. Yeah. Everybody knows me."
You should have been there, Father. I mangled the Minotaur, grappled with the Gorgon, just like Phil told me. I analyzed the situation, controlled my strength, and kicked. The crowds went wild. Thank you.
You're doing great, son. You're doing your old man proud.
I'm glad to hear you say that, Father. I've been waiting for this day a long time.
What day is that, son?
The day I rejoined the gods.
You've done wonderfully. You really have, my boy. You're just not there yet. You haven't proven yourself a true hero.
But Father, I've beaten every single monster I've come up against. I'm the most famous person in all of Greece. I'm an action figure.
I'm afraid being famous isn't the same as being a true hero.
What more can I do?
It's something you have to discover for yourself.
But how can I...
Look inside your heart.
Father, wait!
When I was preparing for this, I have some software developer friends, and they've been raving about this AI website where you can go ask. It's like Google, but Google, like if Google talked back to you and gave you a full answer. So at one point I said, what are the themes of masculinity in Hercules? What, was Phil a hero? And all this stuff. And then this question, I actually wrote it on my paper too. What does it mean to be a hero? And if you guys want to play around with it, it's Chat GPT, and you can go there and probably help. I don't know. It's an interesting way to lose, some time, because you might find yourself 2 hours later still talking to a robot computer in there.
Still having a conversation with nobody.
But it says, being a true hero generally means embodying qualities such as courage, selflessness, integrity, and the willingness to make sacrifices for the greater good. A true hero acts with compassion and empathy, puts the needs of others before their own, also willing to stand up for what's right, even in the face of danger or adversity. And they said in this movie, it's a true hero, someone who can be vulnerable, not afraid of asking for help, can admit their mistakes and learn from them, and overcome their own personal demons in order to become the best version of themselves and help others. I guess, Corey, I'm going to throw that question to you then. What does it mean to be a true hero?
You read what the AI computer answered, and, obviously that just kind of sounds like anything, any kind of secular self-help book that you pick up at Barnes and Noble, right? Which that's to be expected. We're trying to think of things and view things from a spiritual lens. I'm not quite sure that the Bible really talks all much about heroism. It might explain it a little bit. In the book of Judges, there's some really cool, you could even say that in the Bible, the word judges, it could be a synonym for hero, right? They were heroes of Israel. But especially in the New Testament, I just don't know if you see a lot of people with great strength and with mighty power and with acting courageously. I mean, there's some courage, sure, but even if you remember in Acts when who is it? Is it John and James? I don't remember who it is, but they're out and about doing good things for God, and everyone's like, I don't get it. These guys are just normal guys. The only difference is they've been with Jesus, right? And they've interacted with Jesus. In a lot of ways, I think someone who's truly a follower of Christ, and of course, Hercules doesn't have, it might have a hint of decent theology here and there, but, at the end of the day, it's like you said, it's quite literally a movie about bad theology, actually. It's just helpful because it talks about it. And now we get to talk about it. But in a lot of ways, unlike the movie Hercules, Christians we're supposed to find ourselves being the least of these, not the greatest. I mean, quite literally in the movie Hercules, he's trying to become Phil, his trainer wants him to become the greatest hero. Yeah. And that's just the opposite of what we're trying to do. And so maybe if I was to finally, put a little answer on your question, true heroism, or something to really, really, really be proud of in God's eyes, I really do believe happens. How about this? It happens in closets rather than on stages, right? I think a lot of people, even in Christian circles, feel like Christian heroes and heroism happens on stages, or it happens on those TV shows, or it happens in large crowds. When in reality, Jesus, in his most famous sermon ever, over and over and over, says, "Hey, when you do acts of faith, go to your closet and close the door so no one can see." And so I just kind of get this sense that I'm just not quite sure how much of the theme heroism is maybe even to be celebrated all that much. Hebrews 11 verse 6, one of my favorite passages, and this is so fun, Paul. And I'm glad you asked this question, because now this is starting to really come to me. What is Hebrews chapter 11 commonly referred to as?
The Hall of Fame.
It's the
Hall
heroes,
of Faith, heroes of the faith. Yeah,
the heroes of faith, right? And yet, the verse in there that is the best verse in all, and yet no one talks about it all that much, is Hebrews chapter 11 verse 6, and it's very simple, and it simply says this: "And we know that without faith it is impossible to please God." It doesn't say "and without great deeds," or it doesn't say "without preaching these awesome things." It's like this quiet, internal, no one else could see it, because it's what you do behind a closed closet door. Like, this is the thing that pleases God. Faith. And yes, the heroes, if you want to put it in air quotes, the heroes of faith in Hebrews chapter 11, they had a lot of faith in God, and yet it's not because they proved themselves through an action. And in fact, if you look at their actions, it's terrible, right?
Yeah.
Horrifically sinful, all of these people. Things not to be celebrated at all. But in the quiet inner sanctum of their heart, the behind closed doors in the closet sort of idea, they had faith. And that's what, for all the people who listening to Men at the Movies, that's what Jesus is asking of us. When you are in your house and there's nobody around, where does your heart go? What are the things that you really do love? I asked our teenagers this in Bible class this week. I said, in your wildest fantasy, what do you really want? That's who you really are, in your wildest fantasy. And that's so hard, because in my wildest fantasy, a lot of times I am a hero in a worldly context, and I am famous, and I do have a lot of money, and I am pretty powerful, and I am really talented. And that's just so hard. I guess what it comes down to, Paul, like what I'm describing is like, and this is a C.S. Lewis quote, right? We are so much nastier and worse than we really, really care to admit. And yet God's grace really is so much stronger than we could ever imagine. Because I'm not quite sure if we were to print out the transcript of our wildest fantasy of who we would be, I don't think anybody would be proud of it.
It'd just probably be an amplified version of who we are today.
Yeah, I'm sure. So Hercules talks to his dad, and he's like, he has a misconception, right? It's a misconception of what he thinks the divine Father really wants. There's a nod of truth, right? What he thinks the divine Father truly wants. And so he spends like all of his life going after this thing. And it's like, that's not even really what God was after.
Yeah.
We just talked about this. God, what does God want from your life? What pleases him? It is impossible to please God without faith, right? And I think there's so many Christians who feel like, oh, well, to please God, fill in the blank. There's 1,000 things, right? I tell my teenagers at our church, I said, if you ever hear somebody say, if you really want to make God happy, then you need to, I said, don't even listen to what they say. Like, it's like automatically it's just garbage, right? Faith is what pleases God, and God has a lot of grace for you. That's what you need to know. Okay. God has a lot of grace for you. And so, I kind of feel like Hercules has this misconception of what it means to please God. Thank goodness for Hercules, he was young when he found that out. I mean, how many people do you know that waste their lives on chasing the misconception of what they thought God was really after? And maybe you could even argue that faith is really just a bunch of those sequences over and over and over where you realize, oh man, I actually realize what I've been working on the last 3 years is not really what God was after.
It's not up to me. It's not about me.
Yeah, it's not up to me.
I read Psalm 30 this morning in the Message translation, and it said, it starts, I give you all the credit, God. You got me out of that mess. And it's funny because he's like, when things are going great, I crowed, I've got it made. I'm God's favorite. He made me king of the mountain. Then you looked the other way and I fell to pieces.
Yeah.
But the idea that you did it, you changed wild lament into whirling dance. You ripped off my black mourning band and decked me with wildflowers. I'm about to burst with song. I can't keep quiet about you. God, my God, I can't thank you enough. The realization that, and the other part of the reading today was that the parable of the landowner, and he goes out in the morning, he hires guys, I'll pay you a day's wages, goes out 2 hours later, throughout the day. So even the people, and then he pays the guys who showed up for the last hour the same amount as the ones who worked all day.
Yeah. That's a tough parable.
It really is.
It's not fair.
Right. And that's a good thing because we do, again, who's the hero? What's the hero in the story? You're like, well, it's hard to say, well, it's not me, right? What John the Baptist said, he must increase, I must decrease, so he will increase.
Right.
And Paul talks about, in my weakness, I am strong. Or in my weakness, he is strong. But what we see with these three characters, Meg is chasing freedom. She has to prove worthy to buy her freedom. Phil has been disappointed by the people around him. But it's through their success that he finds success. He wants, very similar to Hercules, he wants to be famous. He wants, there goes Phil's boy.
Yep.
And then Hercules, we just talked about.
He wants to find his worth and other people's recognition.
Yeah.
Right.
And Hercules, it's through what he does. Well, look what I did. Here's what I did. The crowds were cheering. I've got an action figure. Aren't I a hero now?
Right. And you could even say, aren't I worthy now?
Yeah.
Right. Because, for Hercules, it's about being a hero. In reality, if you zoom out a little bit, we just come back over and over to this theme of worthiness. Aren't I worthy of being a hero now? Right. I mean, that's how you could put it.
Yeah. Well, and what does Jesus say about the people who make a big show of the fact they're fasting, or make a big show of prayer, or giving their tithes and offerings? He says they get their reward. That they're seeking men's praise and men's, and when I say men's, I mean, people. They're getting the praise and adulation of the people around them. Look what a great hero they are. Look how worthy they are. But as you said, that doesn't please God. God wants you to
Right.
go in your closet. Don't, give so secretly and subtly that your one hand doesn't know what the other hand is doing to fast, but don't look like you're fasting. And that's just, 3 examples of a broader life of what does it mean to be worthy. It starts with realizing that we're not.
Yeah, I think that's totally correct. People who become worthy, I don't even know if I want to say that. No one's worthy, right? No one's worthy. But you said it starts with realizing, obviously, that you're not. I heard someone say this the other day, and I thought it was just really, really true, and I hadn't really thought of it before. They said, for everybody who's going to hell and for everybody who's going to heaven, they all have one thing in common. Is that no matter where you go, every single person will believe they don't deserve to be there, right? They don't deserve to be there. And so following God starts with an unbelievable recognition that you aren't worthy. And the good news of the gospel is that's okay. Because although Jesus is our King, Jesus also, if we are God's inheritance, right? If we are an heir with Christ, it means Jesus is also our brother. And if Jesus is our brother, the best part about him being a big brother is that he's a good one. I know so many of us have been the younger sibling and have had that older brother who maybe they did turn out to be decent, but man, back in the trenches, it was difficult, right? Jesus is the perfect big brother figure, and he shares every single thing that's his.
Yeah.
Well, what's his? Well, he's the king. That's everything. But the most important thing that he shares is his own righteousness and his own worthiness. He shares it with us, should we want it. And so, again, that's just kind of the beauty of the gospel. And so, Hercules is trying to find out if he is worthy of divinity. Phil's trying to find out if he is worthy of other people's recognition. Meg is trying to find out if she is worthy in a lot of ways. Worthy of a lot of things. Meg's got a lot of issues. Meg's got a lot of issues in this movie. In this movie, but as we kind of approach the end of this conversation, the end of this podcast, I'd like to kind of fast forward a little bit towards the end of the movie,
For sure,
if that's all right with you. Because I kind of think, just like how the movie starts, where there's a lot of nods to the truth, I think the movie ends with a lot of nods to the truth as well. And maybe we should have used this clip. I don't know. But there's the movie ends, if you remember, Hercules quite literally drains himself of all of his extra powers of divinity, right? He drains himself of all his powers of divinity, and he does so in order to save somebody, right? And yet, in a weird way, it kind of doesn't work, because the tower thing falls on Meg, and quite literally she dies. And Hercules kind of says, hey, listen, he kind of makes this deal with Hades, and he says, I will take her place.
Well, and the interesting thing, she was someone not worthy of that sacrifice, because she was in service to Hades.
She was sad. That's correct. I love it. I love that detail. And so the movie kind of ends with this scene where Hercules and Hades are standing over this swirling pool, and it's just like this pool of basically dead, ghostly people, right? It's kind of quote unquote, it's the underworld, right? Yeah. It's where dead souls are, sure. And Hercules sees Meg, and he reaches in there to grab her, and yet he finds if he touches it, he too is going to die. Call it true love, what do you want to call it? He doesn't care, right? And so he dives in, and he's swimming toward Meg, and as he's swimming, he is decaying himself. And Hades and Pain and Panic, we didn't even talk about them. We should have talked about them. Hercules, or Hades and Pain and Panic, they're standing on the edge, and they're watching this, and they're getting really excited because Hercules is going to die. And yet, of course, the movie ends with him coming up out of the water and he's holding Meg. And quite literally, does he not only save Meg, in a lot of ways, he kind of dies himself. I mean, you see his like ghostly figure. It's not looking pretty, right? And yet when he comes out, he's not just weak little Hercules, but he's got all the muscles, he's all jacked, and his body's glowing. And so I'd like to kind of just remind everybody of this, of like when Jesus dies on the cross in our place and chooses death, when he raises from the dead, the gospel accounts are very clear. His body's different. I don't believe Jesus is jacked like Hercules, and I don't even know if he's glowing like Hercules, but something about his body is very different. It's a resurrected body, right? I kind of just get this sense that Hades underestimated the power of divine self-sacrificial love. And I think there's a nod to truth right there. You know, I really do think I think Satan was probably pretty happy when Jesus died.
Well, what does Hades say? He's like, I get to take the life of the son of my arch enemy, basically. And yeah, that's a very Satan thing. It's like, oh, I can take the life of the Son of God. Yes, please. Let's do it.
Right. One thing that Hades, or maybe it's Pain and Panic, I don't remember who says it, but they say something when Hercules comes out of the water, and it's so profound. And I want to mention this. Hercules is standing there in his glowing body. You know, he's the hero. He's saved Meg. It's very clear. And someone says, he can't do that. He would be dead unless he's, and they're all stuttering. And I think Panic says finally he's a god. And it's just this big realization that, you know, Hercules has been trying to fight for his divinity all movie long, and finally he has it through, you know, it's not because he was famous. He becomes a hero and restores his divinity through the power of self-sacrificial love. In the same way, we talked about this earlier privately, you know, I teach our teenagers that while both Jesus' death and his resurrection are incredibly important and vital to every aspect of the Christian faith, they're not the exact same thing.
Right.
They accomplished two different things. Jesus' death is the thing that has saved us from our sins. I don't believe his resurrection is the thing that saved us from our sins. Mm-hmm. But what his resurrection did is it proved that his blood truly was divine. And because his blood truly was divine, when he shed his blood on the cross, it truly is the only thing that can actually save us. And so when Hercules rises from the pit and they say, he actually is a god. In the same way, Jesus' death is the only thing that saves us from our sins, but his resurrection is the thing that gives the divine stamp of approval that, like, hey, you don't need to doubt this anymore. This is true. He really is the God that has saved us from our sins. Both are vital to the Christian faith. That's why Paul says, you know, if Jesus didn't raise from the dead, then who cares?
Yeah.
He didn't prove anything. Okay. And I just kind of get this sense that maybe our listeners can, through Hercules' story, can maybe see that although both Jesus' death and resurrection are incredibly vital, they do different things. And that's something to be thankful for.
Yeah.
That's something to be thankful for. They walk hand in hand as the two most important events in all of human history. So yeah, I just think the movie ends on a really, really cool note, and it kind of becomes that Hercules' divinity is proved through his self-sacrifice of love, and I just think there's a big nod to truth there.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, again, going back to Jesus, and you have to lay down your life in order to receive it. So on the Wild at Heart website, they have a daily prayer, and part of it addresses what you were just talking about, Corey, this idea that there are different works of Christ that do different things. And as you mentioned, the cross is where our sin is atoned for. We have been ransomed. We're delivered from the kingdom of darkness. Our sin, that's where our sin nature is removed. And that's where the enemy's claim over us is sort of disarmed. It's canceled. We're good. It's through Jesus' resurrection that we receive life. And we'd be unable to receive that life unless the first thing had happened.
Yeah.
And so that there, it's two sides of the same coin in a lot of ways. Like one without the other is worthless. But when we receive both of them, both the cancellation of our own sin nature, we are dead to sin through the crucifixion. We're alive to God through the resurrection.
Yeah, that's really awesome. Yeah, no, I love that. And I think it's super true. Maybe it's a part of my frustration. And this is with my own kind of little denomination of faith. I go to a Church of Christ, which, if you know anything about, it's not a super popular denomination. It's not even a denomination technically. I say technically because we act like we are, but there's nobody anywhere that tells us what we got to do. We kind of do our own thing, even though most Church of Christs kind of act similarly to each other. Our big hallmark thing is usually we don't have instruments in our worship service for a variety of reasons. It's all a cappella. Think really bad pentatonics. And that's not we have a great worship leader, Dave Barry, but I've been to some Churches of Christ where it's a little rough. But I say all that to say, at least in the Church of Christ, I think one thing that's kind of frustrating is it seems like, at least when it comes to our calendar, we don't view the resurrection and the crucifixion as totally equal. Like Easter's giant. But in my church, we don't do anything for Good Friday.
Right.
We just don't. And maybe other churches are different. And maybe the way to balance that is, I feel like, at least in sermons, a lot of times, I feel like the crucifixion is talked about a lot, Jesus' death, but maybe not quite as much his resurrection. I'm not quite sure. It just seems like we do a bad job of balancing the importance of both of these things. And I think the proof is in the calendar. And so I do appreciate what you're saying, talking about, through that website, talking about how, while both are vital, they do different things. You can't have one without the other. I almost want to say it's a little bit of like a chicken and the egg sort of a thing, although that maybe that's not quite good enough, because that's talking about which came first. We know which one came first in this instance, but the one does not stand without the other, right? Similar to chicken and the egg. You can't have one and not have the other. When you were talking, I had this story. Hercules is trying to prove himself through a little bit here, a little bit there. Oh, he did this thing, and he saved this person, and now he's an action hero, and now he's famous, and now, all these different things. But in reality, what he learns in the end is that, like, it's only through the power of self-sacrificial love that he kind of becomes who he's meant to be, right? Or he can kind of live into the story that's kind of was supposed to be his all along. I heard a preacher tell a story one time, and the story goes like this. There was a chicken and there was a pig, and they were going on a walk. And as they're going on a walk through this neighborhood, they come across this grocery store. And inside the grocery store, it says, there's a sign, and it says, help wanted, in need of ribs and in need of eggs. Help wanted. And the chicken says to the pig and says, hey, we could help them. And the pig says, easy for you to say, you have to just give a little. I have to give everything. And when I heard this story told by this preacher, it's such a stupid, simple story, but it struck me like a boulder. So many of us, probably similar to Hercules, assume that God is asking of us the wrong things. We assume that God is asking of us to go to church. God is asking us to not cuss. God is asking us to do all these little things. And yes, I do understand. Please, nobody hear my point wrong. I do think you should watch your language. I do think you should be a part of a local church. I do think you should do the little things, right? But if all we assume is that God wants these little bits of pieces all throughout our life, then helping God or living into God's story actually becomes pretty easy. Like the chicken, right? It's like, oh yeah, I could do that. But in reality, if you read the gospel and you understand what Jesus is saying, and you read Paul's letters, you would understand that spiritually, maybe we ought to be a little bit more like the pig and say, man, this might be easy for you to say, but if I follow Jesus, I'm going to have to give everything.
Yeah.
It's not about this little bit here, this little bit there. Like it's literally, I've got to give my life. This is what Romans chapter 12 says. My life has to be a living sacrifice. It's not about going to church here and making a donation here and having these quadrants of our life. I tell our teenagers this all the time. If your life is a pie, God does not want to be the biggest slice. Because what do you do with the biggest slice? Eventually you eat it and then you're done with it. God, your life is not a pie. And if your life is a pie, God is not the biggest slice to be at. He demands to be the flavoring that you sprinkle on every square inch to make every single thing quite literally just taste different. I'm hoping that the listeners of Men at the Movies who are listening to this, I'm hoping everybody can walk away and see what Hercules learns is that in order to please the divine, it is not about adding little bits here and a little bit there, maybe even taking away a little bit here and a little bit there. But in reality, if you want to please the divine, you have to be a living, self-sacrificial instrument of love. And that's the only thing that makes Hercules quite literally like his dad. Because when he comes out of that pit, his skin is glowing. But what do we see at the beginning of the movie? Everybody that's up in heaven, their skin glows too. It is only through self-sacrificial love. And for Hercules, he does it once, right? Our call is bigger than that. Our call is every single day. Do you see the call to follow Christ like a help wanted sign in a grocery store, where you just have to give a little egg here and there if you're feeling like it, if it's in you? Or is it, do you truly understand what they're asking? Do you truly understand what God is asking of you? And that when you give to God, it's going to require everything. Like Romans 12 says, let our lives be a living sacrifice every single day to God.
Yeah. G.K. Chesterton said, the Christian ideal has not been tried and found wanting. It has been found difficult and left untried. So we're encouraging you guys out there to try it. And as Yoda says, do or do not, there is no try. So.
And we're going to fail, but God's got the grace. Okay.
Yeah.
We're going to fail, but God's got the grace. Let's just go for it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not about our performance. It's about our heart and what are we pursuing?
Yeah.
And what are we willing to sacrifice? So this has been Paul McDonald and Corey Stumne talking about Hercules. We hope you guys enjoyed it, and we hope you join us next time here on the Men at the Movies podcast.
Something inside has been awakened. I can no longer be who I was before. But if I am no longer who I was, who am I to be?